Welcome back, friends, to the Reyes Reflection, where we dive into stories, ideas, and have conversations that truly stick with you. Real quick, sponsors have deals in the episode bio, so don't miss out on those while you're listening. Today's guest is someone who lives right at the intersection of storytelling and real life. She doesn't just report on the world, but she sits inside it. She spends her time paying attention to those things most people would rather look past. Displacement, systems breaking down, and the people caught in the middle of it. She's at the centerfold of it all. She's a journalist, a writer, someone who understands how close chaos can feel and how to build human connections despite it. She has also stepped into a new chapter, pun intended, with her debut novel, Happy Bad. So today, I get the absolute pleasure to sit and chat with the one and only Delaney Nolan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome, my friend. Thank you so much again for doing this. I really do take your time as a gift, so thank you for giving me some of yours today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I want to learn a little bit more about you before we get into your novel and what you do for work. So when you were younger, what type of kid would you say you were?
Oh, great question. I was a pretty quiet, calm kid. I was like your classic invisible middle child. I had like an older brother and younger brother that were always fighting outside of Boston. And then suddenly I started getting in a lot of trouble. So my book is sort of about I think it's like dedicated to people who were bad kids or who got in trouble. So I was like good. I didn't like party or do drugs, but I did like set a fire at my school and got expelled. So I was like that kind of weird kid. And then I'd like to think I've steadied out a little bit now at this point. No more arson.
No
Just
more arson in some schools.
regular
Okay.
amounts of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was good until suddenly I was in deep trouble.
Right, yeah, seriously. As someone has a background of working with kids, you know, I understand that, and I too was a middle child as well. And I feel like, you know, we don't really get the attention we want. So I think even negative attention is good attention, for lack of a better term. So I think when you were doing what you were doing, it was more so of kind of being like, hey, I'm here, I exist, you know. And I could be wrong, but I find that that's my experience with kids is like they act out to get that attention.
Yeah, and I don't think I was thinking about it in that way at the time. But I think it was more like I'd not run into any big trouble. I had not really experienced big consequences, basically, which does, I think, like come along a little bit with being a little invisible or wanting attention or something. So I just remember there being sort of like a telling myself like the only reason I wouldn't do this is because I am scared because it's actually probably going to be fine. I'm just being too much of too shy, too bashful to go ahead and set a fire near the Spanish classroom so that we all have to get evacuated so I can miss class. Um, but it's just, I don't know, when you're 15, like, your brain isn't really working all the way yet.
Yeah,
Um,
not fully developed. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing that story? Can you expand on that story, or do you want to keep it close to the vest?
No, I can. I'd moved not that long before from Boston area to North Carolina, and I was going to this like really fancy private school, or at least now looking back, it feels fancy. Um, and I just remember I was like in study hall or something, and I really didn't want to go to Spanish class because I found the Spanish teacher. I just remember she was from Indiana, and she always talked about the Hoosiers, and I just found her so irritating. Um, and I went and I set a little fire in the girls' bathroom. I think it was like the paper towel dispenser and stuff like that. And eventually somebody went in and there was smoke and they pulled a fire alarm and we all had to evacuate out to the football field. And um, some administrator was like, it looks like this was intentional. And I got away with it for like a month, for like weeks. No one knew it was me. And then the usual downfall, I told some boy in my driver's ed class. And then the cops came to my house and I got expelled and I got arrested. Luckily I was 15, so it just turned into, like community service and therapy and stuff. Um, but it was hard. I mean, the hardest part I think really was like my family, my parents were like, I could tell they were like, whoa, we had no idea what was going on with this kid. I feel like I like don't know this girl anymore. And that was a really weird feeling to have as a kid, of feeling like my parents being like confused and alarmed by me in that way. It's a really lonely feel. I don't know if you've ever gotten in trouble legally. But it's a really lonely feeling because like no one can help you after a certain point. Even people who love you and want to help you and maybe even are like capable professionals just can't help you. So it feels, that's like some of the loneliest I've ever felt has been when I've been in trouble with legal stuff, that time specifically.
Yeah, especially so young too, right? Like, like you're just a normal kid in the sense of, yeah, you just say things flippantly, not thinking anything of it, and it came back to bite you in the you know what. And I guess that's just all part of growing up. But I was a middle child as well. So I think us middle children, we have a propensity to act out when we're frustrated.
That's what they say. And there's something
Yeah.
so different too about like getting in trouble. Like I've also been arrested more recently for being like in a protest. And there's such a different feeling about getting in trouble for something that like you did that you weren't supposed to, but like you still feel was like okay or that like you were justified versus
Yeah.
getting in trouble for something where like you did bad and you're sort of like
Yeah.
there's no one's gonna help me. No one should help me because I did actually do this thing and I knew I wasn't supposed to. Yeah. The
Yeah.
second one is lonelier. The first one's like you can deal with it.
So it's funny you say that because I had a conversation not too long ago where I said, like the world where when you talk about and you deal with world issues, when you talk about issues in the world, it's not black and white. There's so much gray than what humans are, just gray. And I remember having this discussion and like for example, like, I not that I'm saying I condone people stealing, whatever. But, if I asked you, I said, Delaney, is stealing wrong? Your first reaction would be, well, yeah. And I said, but if I said, well, what if the person is stealing because they have no money and they're trying to feed their family, and if they don't feed their family, they'll die? Right. You know what I mean? Like, that's where I'm like, people, the world is so much gray to sit here and just think that, like, it's like this cut and dry.
Totally.
I think you're simplifying your mind in a sense. But that's just me personally.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I get frustrated when people even use the word criminal, like criminal as though it's like a class of person. I'm going off a tangent now, kind of, but what is legal and what is considered a crime is just something that like we legislated, that we decided, but it's not like some sort of natural thing that exists. It's an agreement that we made, and so it's not like all of us have committed a crime. I'm using quotes because I'm like, crime is made
It's
up.
true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Even just today, I was interviewing somebody about migration arrest down here, and she's like works in the oyster industry down here in the bayous, and she was talking about how like people who are undocumented immigrants like should get their papers right or whatever. But she's like, but also, we've all done something bad. We're all doing something wrong. Like,
Yeah.
so it frustrates me when people talk about how some people are criminal, like classify people as criminals or use the word criminal to describe like a group of people.
Yeah.
Because it is that sort of like black and white binary thinking.
Yeah. I interviewed Marcy, and she spent 20 years in Texas prison.
Wow.
I had such a robust conversation with her, and we talked about how like a lot of those people were more so met with desperation than and more so than it was that they're just like these heinous individuals that are committing
Totally.
crazy. And so it's funny you say that because she too when, similar to what we did, we had a little briefing before and while we're talking, and she said, yeah, I don't really like the word criminal as well. And I go, okay,
Nice.
yeah,
No
yeah.
mercy.
I'm like, all right, I'll try my best to refrain from saying that in the conversation. And that was the reason why she said that it
Wow,
bothered her,
cool.
was because,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was because it was more so of like, they're just people. And, if you want to get technical and down to brass tacks, the last time you sold some thrifted shirt to your friend for $20 and you didn't pay tax on that, that's a crime. So, I mean, like, yes, there's a baseline of things because there would just be this level of insanity that we couldn't live under.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's like,
Who gets punished?
people are people, and if we try to just put this black and white blanket statement on people, I think you're truly doing yourself a disservice as a human being, because now you're not able to feel the empathy towards another human, and you're not able to, you lack that, and you lack just seeing it through their lens. And
Yeah.
and I come from a father who, when he came here, he had to eat rats to survive.
Oh my
You know
God.
what I mean? And you hear the normal person like, ew, that's disgusting. Well, I wouldn't be here if he didn't do that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. And it's not that's amazing. And it's not always as direct as like, well, somebody is hungry and so they have to steal food, right? I think so. Like
right,
one of the things I was interested in exploring and Happy Bad is, there is a little bit of there's kind of a villain a little bit. There's bad someone we don't like, but I didn't want there to be or there's a couple people who are like villain adjacent, but I didn't want there to be like a bad guy who was causing all the problems, because the real villain is sort of like these systems that make it so difficult for us to get the things that we need to live. Like I was doing some street level outreach for houseless people during COVID, which was a lot of like going out to where people are staying under the bridge here in New Orleans and bringing meals, but also like clothes and hygiene items. Then sometimes taking people if they need to like go to the doctor or whatever. And it was all stuff the government should be doing. Some of it was just like paused because of COVID, but some of it, one thing that would always drive me really crazy was getting people's IDs, which like, God, it should be so simple. We should all be able to like just get identification for free when we need it. Like that's like such a basic thing that we all need all the time. But if you are from Texas and you end up in Louisiana, something happens, you don't have housing, and you lose your license or it gets stolen or whatever, it is so hard to get a replacement license. You can't just go to the Louisiana DMV and be like, hey, call Texas, ask them to send you papers or whatever. If you don't have your old ID, you have to get a copy of your birth certificate, like a real, like notarized birth certificate. So you have to like contact the hospital where you were born and get a copy of that and bring it to the Louisiana DMV along with like whatever other document. I'm sure they need like 4 other forms of ID, remember, but I just remember that being like an impossible hurdle. And I just remember like trying to help people navigate that while I was also not working because it was COVID. And then in the middle of doing that, finding out I'd gotten denied a food stamp application and just feeling like I was going to lose my mind because there were all these ridiculous hurdles, these bureaucratic hurdles, making it so hard to get the things that people need to survive, while also telling you it's your fault because you haven't navigated this well enough. You haven't been responsible enough to like get all your papers together. You didn't fill this application out right. You didn't do it on time or whatever. And that anyone who's dealt with a health insurance company has also had this experience of just being driven insane by trying to navigate bureaucracy to get the things you need to survive, while those systems are deliberately making it complicated so that they don't have to, give as much support, while also telling you this is your fuck up and you should be ashamed for not being able to navigate these systems. Makes you crazy. It makes you crazy. No wonder we're setting fires.
it does. It does make people crazy because you brought up, even with the health insurance example, like the amount of times when it's like, I'm sick, I need this medicine. But instead of that medicine, you can have this one, which isn't as good, and it's not gonna. And it's like it's a life or death situation in some of these cases, and that's why I'm saying to be so cut and dry. I love that there's people like yourself that are advocating for others to be able to be like, look, it isn't this cut and dry. You know, there is a lot more layers to this, as we talked about, you know, in our little briefing beforehand. There's layers to individuals, and like you said, there's all these systems put in place that make it so much more challenging for like even someone like myself who's grown up in the United States his entire life, and there are things I'm like, what the fuck did you just? That sounds like a foreign language to me. What do you?
Yeah.
Like I'm supposed to understand what you're saying. I never learned about this. Nobody's taught me this.
Yeah, no one teaches you how to navigate health insurance companies or figure out how to get, long-term care for an aging parent or something. All these things that like we all need to do at some point, but there is no clear and easy way. And that makes you crazy. And it's also constantly changing. And that was also one of the things I was interested in exploring at Happy Bad is like, I feel like we are going in this direction where, and have been for a long time, where we're losing our social safety nets. And increasingly it's, the burden is on the individual to figure out how to get what they need. And so, Happy Bad is sort of like, what's this going to look like another 20 years down the line if we continue going in this direction where people are really being like kind of left on their own to figure things out.
We'll touch up on Happy Bad now. So how do you usually explain Happy Bad to a person who's never heard of it? If you're like, here's my elevator pitch on what this book is and why you should read it.
Yeah. My editor called it a catastrophe novel, which I like. It's a catastrophe novel. It follows the staff and residents at a treatment center for teenage girls in East Texas when there's a massive heat wave that causes a sustained blackout. And so they all have to try to evacuate to Atlanta. They run into some obstacles on the way. That's all I'll say. So it's a catastrophe novel, kind of climate migration novel, and road trip novel all mashed together. And I think it's kind of funny. I try to keep it a little funny.
Yeah. You're layered. Yeah, I can sense the satire and some of the things you say, and I'm like, oh yeah, like so. Maybe I just appreciate your sense of humor. So, after covering the things that you do, how does it change the way that you move on a day-to-day basis? Because you cover some pretty heavy stuff, not just your novel, but you cover some pretty heavy day real stuff.
Yeah, so it's weird because I worked in fiction, or like my background is in fiction for a long time before I got into journalism. So I started doing journalism about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, after Hurricane Ida came through Louisiana. And like the first story I reported was about, very similar to what we've been talking about, was about these Native American tribes and indigenous communities down the Louisiana Bayou and these areas that have gotten just like, it was just wrecked by Hurricane Ida. You drive down the road and just like every telephone pole is snapped at the base. They had to like rebuild this grid from scratch basically. And the land is eroding really quickly. This is an area where there's a place called Ile de Jean Charles that was the first federally recognized climate refugees in the U.S. because this tribe, the Ile de Jean Charles tribe, have lost 98% of the land on this island where they have historically lived for generations. And after the hurricane, they were like, we are going to have to relocate eventually. We're going to have to, do what they call managed retreat, which means move inland because the land is eroding so fast and the storms are getting stronger. And it's hard to rebuild over and over and over. But we don't want to do it with the government's help. For reasons that seem obvious, we don't really trust the American government. We've seen what they've done to the people around us. And so when we have to do this, make this move, we're going to rely on elder wisdom and the community around us and like nonprofits, universities, instead of the government. And I was just so struck by the Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar was her name, telling me this story. I like couldn't stop talking about it. I was just ranting about it to all my friends all the time, and finally ended up pitching the story. And that's sort of how it began. So a lot of my focus has been about climate and displacement and sort of how people are dealing and taking care of each other sort of on the margins, sometimes outside the government's help. And part of the reason that's my focus is because that just comes up so much here in Louisiana. You know, we're like losing, we got a lot of problems, so I'll say, between the climate and housing situations. We have a lot of issues. So I just end up getting sucked into whatever is interesting me at a particular time. And I think the challenge sometimes is like following your interest, following your excitement, but not getting so sucked in that you end up just running on adrenaline and then crashing out and going, having burnout, basically going crazy. I did a couple like reporting trips to conflict zones this year or last year. And by the end of it, I did have like a month where I was just like completely burned out. So following my interests, but still trying to figure out the balance sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even in your line of work, there can be a lot of emotion that's carried into what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I find that, when you do have that emotional attachment to something, it can drain you
Totally.
even more, because physically, like, just think about it when you're really, really sad and all of a sudden you crash, you just want to crash, you're exhausted. And same thing when you're really, really happy and then it's all done, you're like, ooh, I'm done. So whatever emotion is attached to it, there is also that sense of like, oh man, this is so much more exhausting. So good for you to be able to do that mental and physical check-in to give yourself that month.
Thanks. Do you know what vicarious trauma is? Have you heard about this
No,
term?
I've never. I know the term trauma and I know the term living vicariously through something, but but so I think I can understand. Like it's like, and here you'll quiz me real quick. You'll be like, yay or nay. Actually, I have a segment called yay or nay. So it's when you go ahead and you like. Vicariously is like you're living something out, and even though you're not experienced, so I'm imagining it, even though you're not experiencing that trauma, you can feel it because you're feeling that. So with that being said, it sounds like you're a really big empath. Would you say that's a fair assessment of the type of person that you are?
I don't know.
No?
I think I'm like maybe not as much empath as, because I mean we all are affected by how other people feel. But I think I'm curious about people's experience. And I think maybe I'm a little dark, I'm a little morbid, but I think sometimes the difficult experiences can be like the ones that are like the strongest and most affecting. So sometimes I'm drawn to those in particular. But yeah, you are right. Vicarious trauma, it's something that's experienced by, healthcare workers or educators or like therapists or paramedics. So people who you're not the one who, got shot at or whatever, but you're helping somebody, you're hearing the story of somebody who did go through a trauma. And especially if like you're doing that for work, you're doing that all the time, it ends up affecting you. It's not exactly the same as like having trauma or getting PTSD, but it can be really similar. So again, like Happy Bad, a lot of the things it's interested in exploring are how workers at these centers, or at this center, but also people who are in like similar lines of work, experience vicarious trauma. And then after a certain point, like you're not going to be good at your job because you were hobbled by vicarious trauma. You're dealing with your own shit. And I think in journalism, sometimes like almost the opposite, like, almost the opposite of like having an empath's experience. For example, I was in the West Bank of Palestine this summer, and you're just hearing these painful stories back to back every day. Like everyone has
Yeah.
a story of their home being burned or their son being killed or their brother being tortured to death, like just nonstop.
Yep.
And you kind of can't bring all your full feelings to the surface all the time with everyone you're speaking with. And so it wasn't really until um, like it was over and like weeks had gone by that I started feeling really affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
And now in retrospect, I'm like, well, of course that was affecting. Like it was sort of arrogant for me to be like, I could see how hearing traumatic stories all the time would affect other people, but not me though. I'm going to be fine. But if you're walking over
Right.
hot coals all the time, eventually your feet are going to get burned. That's just how it works. And
Exactly.
someone like yourself interviewing people with intense stories, that's the kind of risk you can end up facing as well.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because that's one of the reasons why I started this was just because like I was one of those individuals like I've heard the saying that truth is stranger than fiction, and
Mm-hmm.
so and you with a background in fiction, yes, there's some idea to like if I see something or if I want to create some sort of story in my head, I can go ahead and try to do as best as I can to construct these characters and cultivate these connections. But at the end of the day, it's like there are real stories that do have those exact experiences that I'm talking about. So
Totally.
I was always the type of person that was like similar to you, fascinated with people's stories and what makes you think that way and why did you come to this conclusion. And I think part of that is maybe myself just I grew up with I'd say a pretty troubled life of having my parents divorced, being exposed to guns, drugs,
Mm-hmm.
violence, etc., etc. And whenever I hear someone talk to me and they go, "Wow, you," it can be taken as a compliment. But when you hear someone say like, "Wow, you," wait, you're not into drugs, you're not into alcohol, and I'm like, no, I decided to kind of switch that, and then it allowed me to navigate within my own personal channels of like, why didn't I? Because I could have taken that left,
Mm.
I could have done that, and so, and part of that is just self-assessment, of course, but yeah, and so I love hearing these stories just because it allows me to be able to understand someone's perspective. And while I may not always agree with it, the fact that I can, one interview I had with someone, we talked about, depression and anxiety and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't suffer from that. So can you explain to me?
You don't
So
get depression or anxiety?
no, 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 no. I would say I'm pretty fortunate. And so,
That's amazing.
and so what'd you say?
I just said that's amazing. You're like the only person I know who's mentally
So,
healthy.
it's funny you say that because I have a friend who's in psychotherapy who said that too. She said it's like a gift. It's like it truly because she goes, so what about if this happens, this happened? And I said, I think I moved so much in my youth. I moved, I'd say 20 times before I was even 10 years old. So I think at some point maybe I did feel like that general anxiety and that angst and what have you and the sadness of leaving my friends and leaving what I know. But I think it helped curate this person that I am now because now I can have these conversations with effectively a complete stranger. Yeah, I know we've talked for like the last few weeks, but this is the first sit down that we're having.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm able to have these conversations with people where I can understand at a deeper level or even just, build these connections with people. And it's not just an interview, it's us talking and then us becoming like quote unquote for lack of better terms friends after because it's like wow like I felt like we had a robust exchange. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think at some point I probably did have those general feelings, but I almost think life didn't allow me to have it or it didn't allow me to process it because it was so quick that I
Hmm.
had to pivot into the next thing. And so knock on wood,
Yeah.
hopefully I don't need to address that, but at some point if I do, I think hopefully I can have the resources to be able to help me. But yeah, no, I appreciate that you're saying that because it is something that I think I worked on for a while because I think yes, it's a good thing that I can have these conversations with random strangers, but the caveat to that is that with close friends, I was almost distancing myself. You see what I mean? Like I was almost, because I was like, this might end, because that young Nathanael was like, well, if I have a friend, I'm just gonna move in a month. So why do I want to hold on to this connection?
Yeah.
Right? And so, I've had some friends that are like, you can let me in. It's okay. And so, but I think it takes someone who's self-aware to be like, man, I do push people away. I am putting up a wall. And so I did have to go through that internal, I'm not perfect, right? Everybody has their own internal demon that they battle and that they struggle with. Mm-hmm. And mine would be that I have a hard time fostering deep rooted relationships. Yes, I can sit next to someone at a random restaurant, talk their ear off, give me half a subject, and I'll run my mouth for an hour about it. But when it comes to these deeply rooted, connected relationships, that I do struggle with. So I think that that's just, a normal part of, because it's a normal part of me based off my upbringing, which is why. But to circle back to the main point that I was saying, I think that's why I wanted to do this, because I love hearing what makes a person tick. Why do you do what you do? Why do you believe what you believe? Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, I want to transition to this question that I have for you. How different then does it feel to write a novel into the world compared to an article?
Yeah. Oh my God. So different. One of the things that helps me do one of the things I learned from journalism that did help with the novel was just like in a really basic level structure. Like it just was good practice to have some ideas and information and have to sort of fit them together in a way that made sense and had an end, and then be finished and send it off to an editor, and then it's not my problem anymore. And having like practice just writing something, was all put together and had a shape, and then was finished. So anyway, that was good practice, because I was working on this draft for years, and I have written short stories, but it was my first real attempt at like finishing an entire novel. And it's like, with a story, I feel like I can hold the entire narrative arc in my head at once. But with a book, just by virtue of it being much longer, it's hard for me to like see the whole thing at the same time. So getting the narrative arc where it feels like, we're building up to something, and then there's a change, and then they're figuring out the problems, and then we have a satisfying conclusion, was hard. But similar to what you're saying, it's like one of the reasons I went into journalism is because sometimes, I don't know if you've ever like been doing some research for work and you like go down a rabbit hole, and then you like get really obsessed with it, and then you end up kind of like trying to shoehorn it into whatever you were working on, even though maybe it doesn't make sense just because you thought it was like so cool or interesting.
All the time.
So I was having that issue with the book, and journalism ended up being this way where I just had like another bucket to put things in, like interesting stuff I would come across or that I wanted to dig in, or just was so striking by virtue of it being true, because that is also like what you were saying, sometimes it's amazing to make up a story that is drawing from real life, but there's also these stories that are incredible, and it also means something that they are a real story that happens to real people. And I think they just like attribute very different types of meaning. So let's see if I can explain this. Part of the reason I went into journalism is because have you ever been through like some kind of disaster, like a natural disaster of some kinds, or just like a sort of breakdown of society for a few days?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask what?
I would say that the only thing that I went through, it wasn't anything like like Hurricane Katrina or the hurricane that you were referencing. We did have a Hurricane Sandy, actually. Fun fact, I have a lovely scar.
Oh my God.
Because on my hand here, because I was trying to board up windows and the glass came through and sliced my hand open. But so yes, I have gone through
Hurricane Sandy. I wasn't here for Hurricane Katrina either. That's like its own category of
Yeah.
catastrophe.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But I think sometimes when you go through a disaster like that, you want it to mean something. You want it to be, you want to feel seen. You want it to feel significant. You want to be like, this changed things for me. And you kind of want it to be recognized.
Hmm.
And so part of journalism was sometimes I was interested in trying to like help people feel seen, or like their story, reassured that their story has meaning, that it does matter, by sort of documenting it and publishing it at The Guardian or Al Jazeera or whatever. Um, and I think after a few years, I feel more aware that like that does not automatically imbue meaning or make things feel seen or understood, because even journalism, like, it's published and then the world moves on, and it also just doesn't capture everything. You have to kind of use dry journalism, factual voice.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, I want to be able to say, hey, I, as a journalist who has seen things like that, I was really affected by this, even for hurricane damage or whatever. This was really crazy. And so some things really do feel like they could only be portrayed with fiction, where you get to sort of like get the interior of multiple people, um, and seeing your own experience portrayed in detail in fiction, I think is like hopefully a lot of us have had the experience of feeling like we recognize ourselves in a piece of writing or a piece of fiction, and that feels so good. Not your whole story, but maybe like one part of who you are, one part of your story, or one feeling.
Hmm.
So they feel really like two very different ways, but both sort of like attempts to um, like capture and give meaning to people's experiences. And neither of them are doing it all. So I just decided to kind of do both.
Yeah. Yeah. My final question for you today is, what helps you center back to who you are as an individual?
That's a nice question. Honestly, going for a walk near water, taking my dog down on the other side of the levee and walking along the Mississippi and looking at tugboats and going under the washed up river debris and willows, just, I think, is the best thing for clearing your brain out. And you do need to clear your brain out sometimes. Sometimes you just need to have no outside stimulation, not reading, not listening to something, just trying to clear your head and hearing water and seeing the sky, trying to have no thoughts, I think is
Yeah.
like so good for you, for being able to then do whatever work it is that you are trying to do otherwise.
Yeah. Like be bored a little bit.
Be
Yeah.
bored. Yeah, it's good for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, it is. Delaney, I really can't thank you enough. I could have talked to you for 3 hours today. I probably, you are delightful. Thank you for
This was
spending
so
some time with
fun.
me. Thank you for spending some time with me. It means a lot that you shared your perspective, your stories, your process. Before I let you go, can you tell everyone where they can pick up Happy Bad, and can you plug yourself in? How do people follow you, get to see your journey, your work, all that stuff? Because you are a remarkable individual, and we would like to get more eyes and ears on you. So could you please plug yourself in?
Thank you so much. Yeah, you can pick up, my name is Delaney Nolan. You can find my writing by searching my name or going to delaney-nolan.com. Happy Bad is out from Astra House, so you could pick it up in your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it. Or you can go to your favorite non-evil bookseller of choice, whether that's Powell's or, I'm not going to say Amazon, but some Amazon adjacent thing. And do I have any events coming up? I just had an event rescheduled. And that's it. And I'll be out and about with more reporting all the time.
Well, again, thank you so much for just sitting down with me. You truly are one of one. I really appreciate your time. That is going to do it for this episode of the Reyes Reflection Podcast. Big thanks to Delaney, our sponsors. I appreciate you again for sharing your insight. Don't forget to check out her debut novel, Happy Bad. And of course, to all the listeners, remember, may you live, may you love, and may you thrive. I'm Oprah as a dude, and I love you all.
Thanks, you.